What is going on, guys? My name is John and welcome back to yet another video. When it comes to looking at the impact that a Pokemon generation has had on the series, the Black and White era is by far one of the most innovative generations in the series' history. Among all the quality of life additions that were thrown in, there are a ton of game modes and locations that have been exclusive to this area for over a decade. To be honest, I've really neglected the Gen 5 sequels on the channel, so let's take some time to look at one of the more unique additions to these games. Today we're going to find out how easily you can beat the Pokemon World Tournament in Pokemon Black 2 and White 2. Now, if you've played these games before, you've definitely heard of the Pokemon World Tournament, and most certainly played a small portion of it. This piece of side content is actually required to be played as part of the main story for these games, but just like every other Pokemon game, once you finish it, you're not required to come back. If you're a longtime viewer, you'd know that I've covered quite a lot of the side content in the main series games, but this is easily one of the most underappreciated game modes in the entire series. Before we get into everything, be sure to leave a like on the video and subscribe for more content like this. These videos take a lot of time to put together, so it really helps out the channel, and you can always change your mind down the road. With that out of the way, let's just jump right into it. For those that have participated in this game mode before, you know that your first visit to this area was pretty brief, and to be honest, it didn't really do much to wow you or give you much interest in heading back to the area at any point from then on. After you defeat Clay, you meet him at the Pokemon World Tournament, and have a couple battles against the main characters of the story, and then exit the area and make your way north. As a kid, I just assumed that this was another Battle Tower-esque game mode, but once I came back to it after a few years, I realized that this location is one of the coolest fan services in the history of the franchise. The Pokemon World Tournament, or PWT, is located below Driftveil City, and it's actually the replacement for the cold storage that was torn down in the previous versions. On a quick side note, if you caught a Pokemon in the cold storage in Black and White and traded it to the sequels, it will actually say that the Pokemon was caught at the PWT for some reason. Anyways, before we go inside the building to the main events, I think it's important to show off one really cool addition that the developers put outside the stadium. If you walk around the area, you'll notice that there are a bunch of stands near the walkway. These are the locations for the Move Deleter, Move Relearner, as well as the Ultimate and Elemental Pledge moves. While this may not seem like a big deal nowadays, this made the locations much easier to remember if you ever needed to adjust the movesets to your Pokemon, because up until then, these trainers were always randomly scattered around the map. This area also offers the Move Tutor, and there are a couple of cool items that you can obtain like the Rocky Helmet. But aside from that, the outside is pretty much only for decoration. So let's check out the main attraction. The Pokemon World Tournament building has very similar vibes to the Battle Maison in future games, as there isn't really much to say about the lobby. You've got the counter for battle points and general info, some stairs that are there to look nice, and the attendants that help you get set up for the tournament. Now usually these two attendants have the purpose of setting up offline and multiplayer battles, but for some reason this location is completely different. Rather than having an online option, the right attendant offers the actual Pokemon World Tournament, while the left contains a list of different Battle Frontier-like modes for you to try on the side. Before we check out the big tournament, let's just see what the left side has to offer. Here we can participate in 4 different game modes. For now, let's go over the Driftveil tournament. As you can probably assume, this is the original format that you have to complete in the story, but it's important to note that all these game modes can be completed in single, double, triple, or even rotation battles, which means that for any of these game modes, you can experience a completely different match even if you're facing some of the same players as last time. I haven't really got around to explaining exactly how these battles play out in this facility, but if you watch my video on getting all the gold symbols in the Battle Frontier, this is basically the same exact facility as the Battle Dome. You had to run through a bracket-style format and obviously win every battle to complete the tourney. Although it's important to note that this is the only game mode available at the PWT, you'll see in a bit as to how much content is actually here. The first time that you play through this, you're required to fight your rival, Charon, and Colress, but once you're able to return the area, the list expands to 16 trainers that you can be matched up against. The list contains some of the most important characters in the story, as well as some random trainers that I presume just live in Driftveil City. This is the only game mode that brings your Pokemon down to level 25 rather than level 50, and the teams are generally pretty weak aside from a few standout Pokemon. There isn't really much to say about this one considering that it's by far the least original format in the building, but the next few are a lot more interesting. If you've played any of the Battle Frontier modes, you're probably most familiar with the rental mode that's offered. Now usually you're able to pick from a list of 6 Pokemon to build a team of 3, but in this mode the attendant asks you to pick a ticket that will determine the 6 Pokemon that you can choose from. I'm not really sure if this is another one of those false choice kind of things where it doesn't actually matter at the end, but I'll give it the benefit of the doubt that all 3 tickets are something different. From my experience, the choices are always based around Gen 5 Pokemon, but once again, if you choose either double or rotation battles, you have to pick 4 Pokemon to bring into this competition, and triple battles give you all 6. As for the trainers that you fight here, the Pokemon are actually taken straight from the battle subway, which isn't all too surprising, but the Pokemon are selected from the normal grouping, which means that your opponents are basically going to be at the same strength as you are, giving it a pretty casual difficulty. While this is a really interesting game mode, there is one standout feature that was completely removed. trading your rentals. For some reason, you don't get to pick a Pokemon from the opposing team like the other generations, which is kind of the biggest appeal of the format. Instead, you're just stuck with whatever random Pokemon you're given once you enter, which means that you also have to hope that the Pokemon you chose have enough coverage to make it through the entire bracket. Considering that the pool of Pokemon you'll face is small for Battle Facility standards, this isn't a huge deal. But for those who are big fans of the Battle Factory, are probably going to be pretty disappointed if they came across this game mode. Thankfully, the next mode kind of fills this gap. The Mixed Tournament is basically the exact opposite of the last one, as you use your own team that's available in the game, and then swap them with your opponent as you climb your way to the top. Before each battle, you and your opponent will pick one Pokemon from each team to swap for the battle. This mode loosely reminds me of the Dart game mode from Battle Revolution for some reason, but as you can expect by just looking at my opponent's Pokemon, this rarely ever goes in your favor. A majority of the time your team is significantly stronger, and you just have to hope that they don't randomly pick the most powerful Pokemon to run through your team. This can still work very well in your favor, since you can limit the amount of counters they have against one of the Pokemon in your team, but for the first time ever you can lose a battle from your team being too good. During the time that I played it, the only threat that I had to deal with was my own Hydreigon, but since it was choice spec'd, it locked itself into Draco Meteor and was -6 special attack by the time it was taken down. I'd still like to note though that it landed all 5 Draco Meteors, and during the bracket I think I landed about 3, so there was a solid chance that I could have easily lost this tourney. The final tournament that's available on the left counter are the download events. As you expect, these are the ones that you receive from special events or over Nintendo Wi-Fi connection. In the English version of the game, you could obtain events from the black PC next to the attendant, which only had a few events, but they easily had some of the coolest pieces of downloadable content to ever come to the series. The only ones available for North America were the Junior, Senior, and Masters division for the 2012 Pokemon Video Game Championship. In these modes, you face off against the top place players of each of the formats, including the exact team that they used during that competition. Not only is this a super neat piece of history that you can play whenever you want if you still have it downloaded, but there are actually quite a few important players in the VGC's history like Ray Rizzo and even Wolfglick that you can fight. If I'm not mistaken, I think that Wolfie and the members of the Game Grumps are the only 2 content creators that have ever been in a Pokemon game. So all I'm saying, Game Freak, is that if you're somehow watching this and you're looking to add more to the list, I wouldn't be opposed to being a Fortress Master Trainer or something. On a side note, the Junior division actually had 2 different events because they messed up the teams for one of the players. So if you're into collecting very abstract Pokemon things, this event only lasted for 2 days until they replaced it with the updated rosters. Per usual, Japan had a large list of events that not only contained Japanese tournaments, but also really cool matches against gym leaders with insane teams. I mean, you can fight Sabrina with a Mewtwo and a Falkner with a Lugia, what more could you want? Although all these events released before the game was out internationally, they were left up on the servers until the Nintendo Wi-Fi service was discontinued in 2014, which begs the question as to why these were Japan and sometimes Korea exclusive events. As far as I know, these events can't be obtained anymore even through the DNS exploit, but if you can find a way to get them, I'd definitely give them a shot. Now let's check out the main event. When you first enter the Pokemon World Tournament, you'll notice that there's only one option available at the right counter, that being the Unova Leaders Tournament. This game mode is essentially an expanded version of the Driftveil tourney, as it includes all the gym leaders and rivals that are in the Generation 5 games. While this may not seem super interesting on the surface, considering that you've already had to fight them before, all of their teams have been updated with competitive movesets, as well as leaders like Salon, Chili, and Crest have been separated into their own trainer battles, so there's potential that you could fight all 3 in a single bracket. Unlike the left side of the PWT, the trainers are much more like the later streaks of the battle facilities, but imagine if all of them were team-based, which may seem like a pretty easy thing to deal with, but the movesets in this game are probably some of the most diverse I've seen in quite a while. Because you're guaranteed to fight a leader throughout the entirety of this, every battle feels like the final battle, which is such a unique experience that you can't really get from previous installments. One interesting thing to note is that every leader that you face will always lead with the same Pokemon. For example, Drayden will lead with Haxorus, Charon will lead with Stoutland, and Elisa will always have Zebstrika. I think this definitely gives them a lot more character considering that these Pokemon are normally their ace, so while it doesn't really affect the gameplay all too much, it's a very cool attention to detail. Once you clear through this game mode one time, you'll unlock something extremely cool. After talking to the clerk, she'll tell you that there are tougher opponents that are now able to be taken on, and when you check your options, you'll be surprised to see that you can now fight in tournaments against all of the gym leaders across the Pokemon series. And I'd like to note that it's not like they included 3 that you're forced to fight every bracket. No, it's literally every gym leader in the series history. They even accounted for gym leaders that were replaced, like Kanto includes Janine instead of Koga, and Hoenn has Swan instead of Wallace. If you played Heart Gold and Soul Silver and participated in the Fighting Dojo rematches, you might be quick to say that the teams are very similar to those in the PWT, but they've completely reworked almost every moveset to reflect Generation 5's level up and TM compatibility, which shows even more as to how much care they actually put into this game mode. This isn't necessarily just a PWT thing, but if the gym leader had a Pokemon that earned an evolution in later gens, they'll use the highest evolution that's available. Examples of this are like Blaine with Magmortar and Bugsy with Yanmega. While all of this is already really nice, the coolest addition is that the music for all the gym leaders has been updated with the same Gen 5 sounds, so you can experience your favorite battle themes that perfectly tie in with the rest of the soundtrack. This is one thing that actually shocked me, because they could have easily just kept most of the tracks the same as they used to be, but they all sound so much better than the originals, even though some of them were already remastered 2 years ago for Heart Gold and Soul Silver. One strange thing to note is that both Iris and Koga are completely absent from the entirety of the PWT, and I can't really understand the reasoning why. I understand that they were both replaced at one point in the series, but you'll see in a bit as to why it's weird to completely exclude them from the list. I'd like to note that this may seem really obvious, but this is much more difficult than any of the game modes from the left attendant. I wouldn't necessarily say it's anything like mind-numbingly challenging, but their movesets and teams are a solid mix of being tough, but also enjoyable enough for you to want to try it multiple times. Now, while this is already a really neat collection of options, there is a bonus surprise to those that complete each of the 5 regional gym leader tournaments. If you check back after winning them all, you'll unlock another 4 game modes that you can mess around with: World Leaders, Rental Master, Mix Master, and Type Expert. As you can expect, Rental and Mix Master are basically upgraded versions from the left counter, which may not seem like a huge deal, but this next part really seals the deal. In the Rental Masters, not only are the trainers replaced with every gym leader from every generation, but all the Pokemon you are given are from the Battle Subway Super Series, which means that you're going to get a random assortment of any of the fully evolved Pokemon available in the National Pokedex. Considering that each of these Pokemon have 4 different potential movesets, it's basically impossible to have the same team or face the same team no matter how many times you play, and all the leaders will have completely random teams as well. In the Mixed Master tournaments, the Unova Gym Leaders teams are made to match the Unova Leaders bracket teams, which makes it seem a little bit less interesting to participate in, but at least it's a lot more difficult than the standard mixed tournament. Type Expert is arguably the one that will probably take you the most time to complete, considering how much planning is needed to actually finish the entirety of the game mode. As you can imagine, Type Expert requires you to fight against trainers with similar typings to you. Think of this as a little more of an advanced version of the Battle Hall from Gen 4's Battle Frontier. In this mode, you're required to submit a team that'll all have the same typing, and face off against a gym leader with the same type Pokemon. This means you can assemble a team of fire Pokemon and take on all of the fire type gym leaders in this tournament. Now, normally this would be extremely difficult, but thankfully you can use dual types to add a lot more diversity to your squad. But the gym leaders team has been upgraded as well, and they cover your team as best as they can. In total, there are 17 different tournaments that you need to take on, and while you don't have to make 17 different teams because of the dual types, you're going to need a lot of Pokemon to help you get through this challenge. There isn't really a ton to talk about for this one because it's super straightforward, but I think it's important to note that because of the limited pool of gym leaders that are available in the games at this point, a lot of the type tournaments have random trainers thrown in due to some types having less than 3 trainers. Types like Steel, Ghost, and Poison have them, but since Dark didn't have a single gym at this point, you get to fight against Vito, Impera, and Bonnie, who are just another collection of trainers. I'm pretty sure they haven't been in any other game aside from this one, but if anyone has info on these trainers, I'd love to learn more about them. Now that we've looked over all of these, let's talk about the last one on the list, the World Leaders Tournament. As you can imagine, this tourney contains every gym leader that was available within the region-based game modes, but instead you're given a random assortment of them every time that you play. The teams that they use are the same advanced versions that they use in the Expert Series modes, so this is not only the most difficult, but probably the most unique experience you'll have within this facility. Even if you completed this mode last, odds are there are plenty of trainers and Pokemon that you haven't faced off against, so there's still plenty of reason to play this. I'm not going to bore you to death with explaining this any further, but just know this is a super cool concept. But what if I told you there was one more mode? One mode that's better than probably all of the tournaments combined. If you manage to beat the World Leaders Tourney a total of 10 times, you'll unlock the Champions Bracket. In this mode, there are only 7 leaders that you face, however, they are all the final battles and champions across every region. Try and tell me this isn't the coolest thing ever. You have a chance to fight against Red, Blue, Lance, Steven, Wallace, Cynthia, and Alder in every tournament. And unlike the other playlists, their teams are close enough to the original, but still have that Gen 5 flair to make them still feel like a brand new battle. To make it even better, yes, the music has also been updated for these too, which isn't really much of a surprise considering you fight Cynthia in the post-game anyways, but it's hard to argue that these aren't some of the best remixes in the entire game. The fact that you can still fight them in a double, triple, or rotation battle blows my mind. I know it's not a hard thing to implement, but the concept of fighting what's supposed to be the hardest battle in the game with half of your team on the field is such a foreign concept that it completely changes the way that I look at these fights. If you end up beating this, you'll actually earn a star on your trainer card, but I think it's best to save all of that for another video. And with that, we've successfully beat the Pokemon World Tournament. But how did I do? So let's review. The addition of the Champions Tourney really seals the deal for me and shows how much of a fan service this game mode is to the Pokemon community. I know that later on in generations there were legend battles, but there really hasn't been a location in the Pokemon games that's even slightly close to what the PWT has to offer. To me, it's an unintentional hidden gem, and it's kinda sad the majority of the people that have played the sequels have barely touched any of this area, but it's also kinda Game Freak's fault for not really incentivizing coming back at any point like the rest of their side content. On the other side, it's pretty wild that they hid all this behind beating the Unova Leaders Tournament, and it's definitely aimed at the most dedicated players in the community. If you've never had the chance to play through the PWT, it's pretty obvious that I couldn't suggest it anymore. The Generation 5 games are pretty underappreciated as is, and this is only one of the many things that they've added to make the games a truly unique experience. If you're interested in taking on this challenge yourself, I've included some links in the description to help you become the best of the best. Other than that, that's all there is to say about beating the Pokemon World Tournament in Pokemon Black 2 and White 2. And that's going to do for today's video. If you liked the video, leave a like and consider subscribing, as I'll be making more content like this very soon. If you have any other suggestions for videos that you'd like to see, leave a comment below. Follow me on Twitter to keep updated with new videos as they come out. If you're interested in watching me take on challenges live, I've been streaming a lot over my Twitch account, as well as upload highlights on my Johnstone live channel that you can find in the description. Other than that, I'd like to thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.